Hello, everybody.
Howdy, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Yes,
All right.
absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, good.
Hey, Yurie, how are you? Oh, sorry.
I'm good, Scott.
Realizing that my volume was off. Sorry about that, Adam. How are you? Are you guys doing well?
Yeah,
Yeah,
all good.
I'm so glad to hear it.
Boston today.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well done.
Oh, well done.
Yeah, great place to be. I have to say, though, it's beautiful here in Bloomington. It doesn't get much better. Andrea, I'm so glad you got the link. I'm sorry for the hassle there.
Yeah, no problem. I suddenly realized I had nothing.
I know, I've been there. Usually I find out about 2 minutes after the meeting was supposed to have started. So at least you were
Well,
more on the ball.
2 minutes before the meeting started, so happy to be here.
here.
I also just lost an enormous amount of work that I had just worked on, and I didn't save it. So I'm a little bit phased right now.
Oh, I'm so
Other than
sorry.
that, all good.
Talking about cyber public health, right? Oh man.
Now, please, I hope you realize I'm the least qualified person to talk in this group, so please don't call on me too much on health issues because
No, yeah.
Yeah.
No
you
worries.
know
I think
my lane. You know my lane.
for sure. No, chime in as you would like. And yeah, well, like you saw in the little thread there, we'll start off with just some softballs and just a chance for folks to introduce themselves, and we'll take it from there. And I think it looked like, thanks so much for your note as well, Yurie. That was so helpful. But we'll go, I think, Dan, Yurie, Adam, and Andrea, as far as the order.
Good.
Works for me. Works for me too. Brian, good to see you too. Welcome. We'll get started here in a few minutes.
Good to see you.
Absolutely. And Espen, thanks for joining. And Rob, great to see you. Thanks for joining too. I think thanks to a lot of heavy lifting from Carrie, we had around, gosh, like 45 or so registrants. So we might just give folks a few minutes, and when we reach, doesn't have to be the huge percentage of that, but a bit more of a critical mass, we'll get rolling here in a couple. Do you guys have any questions before we do that?
No, I don't think so, Scott. I think,
Okay, great.
groups is such a good experts, and I see, great names of the experts registered.
Mhm.
So I would really keen to hear their perspectives rather than just us talking. So,
For sure.
our introduction is really to set the, sort of foundation, so people are all on the same page what we're trying to do. But after that, I think it should be all welcome to input and then answer those questions.
Absolutely. Yurie. No, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Very, very useful up front here. And that's part of the fun. Great. And so we've got a few more joining as well. Great. And just as a heads up to everybody, we will be recording this. Usually we just post everything that we do up to the Ostrom Workshop YouTube channel. If anybody has a problem with that, though, just let us know, okay? And we'll address. No problem. Oh, and Audrey, great to see you as well. I'm glad you're able to join. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of course.
I'm in London right now. I'm not at home.
That's quite all right.
It's a student accommodation. I'm going back to being student.
Yeah, right.
That was the only thing available apart from paying £400 for a night.
Yeah, right. Full circle. Yeah, that's great. And we'll do a little bit of a lightning round of introductions here too. I think that'd be nice. Everybody can get a sense for who else is on the call. Before we turn to our featured speakers. So in fact, we might just get going with that as folks join in, just in the interest of time, since I think we're going to be packing quite a lot into this hour. So maybe without further ado, we'll just go ahead and dive in if that sounds okay to everybody. So welcome. Thank you all for joining this dialogue on cyber public health and this special roundtable today. Right off the bat, we wanted to make sure to thank the outstanding staff at the Ostrom Workshop here that helped make this happen, including David Price and Carrie McMullen. So thank you. It takes a lot of wrangling to pull this together. And thanks very much to our key partners in this, including cyber public health, right? And CyberGreen in particular. This is going to be really, really a fascinating discussion. I have no doubt. There's been so much focus over the last few years on protecting public health infrastructure from various kinds of cyber attacks. And there's been a lot of focus, needless to say, on public hygiene. But I think not too many people are aware that there's even a deeper cross-pollination of these fields that's been underway. And that's partly what we're hoping to discuss today, to kind of pull back the covers there a little bit, get a better understanding about what we can learn from these different fields, what best practices can be cross-pollinated, and where there's just, differences that we need to take into account. So there's a lot of exciting work that we're going to be going over as part of this discussion. And my sense is going in that this is just going to be the beginning, my hope, of a much longer and deeper series of dives that we can take together. Maybe even a working group coming out of this group. We'll see. But first, again, just in the interest of time, I thought we could do a very, very quick, just lightning round of introductions for who's on the line first, and then we'll turn to our featured speakers for their kind of couple-minute opening remarks. If that sounds okay. So I understand that there's some folks who aren't in a place where they would like to turn on their camera or otherwise say hello, in which case, completely fine. I totally understand. There's a lot of reasons for that, so no worries. But if we'll just I'll go down the list here really quick for the folks I recognize in case any of them would like to say howdy. Rob Templeman from Crane, do you want to say a quick hello?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this event. My name's Rob Templeman, and I work for Naval Sea Systems Command. So I'm in the National Defense vertical, but I follow all verticals as closely as I can to see what kind of goodness I can glean there. And I'm really interested with the composition of this panel here and seeing how the discussion pans out in this area. So thank you for having me. Over.
Of course. No, we're thrilled to have you. Thanks for making the time. And it looks like I'm just so sorry just to call out a bit of a random order, but the numbers keep changing on top of the screen here. We don't have a lot of time, so we'll keep this pretty short. But Andrew Korty, I recognize. Andrew, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, howdy. This is Andrew Korty. I used to work for IU as CISO there, but for the past year and a half, I've been working for Team Cymru, a threat intelligence firm managing their internal security operations and network team.
Excellent.
So glad to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, absolutely. No, we have been as well. Thanks for joining too. And we keep getting more folks, so I'm worried a little bit that if we go through each one, we're going to eat up the first half an hour pretty quick. So here's my suggestion before we turn to our featured speakers. For other folks who would like to say hello, please utilize the chat function. That's what it's for, okay? You can say a little bit about yourself, kind of why you're here, and that can also start some useful side conversations. But I think for now, just in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and turn to our featured speakers and then have a broader discussion so we can hear from more of you at that point. Since this is a roundtable, after all, that's part of the fun here. So first off, this is, I think, the rough order of how we're going to be proceeding so that we're all on the same page. We're going to begin with just very brief 3 to 5 minutes of opening remarks from each of the featured speakers, starting, if it's okay, Dan, with you, Dan Geer, and I'll give a quick bio here in just a second before going on to Yurie, Adam, and Andrea. And then, like I said, after that, we'll be opening it up for anybody else to feel free to throw out their own work, their own research. Audrey, of course, would love to hear more from you in this capacity as well. And then we'll just take the discussion where it leads from there. We have a couple of questions off the bat to kind of help guide some of the initial discussion, but from that point on, we'll take it as any direction that you got folks would like to. So let's start with Dan. So guys, everybody, I think many of you are aware, but for those who aren't perhaps, so Dan Geer is a security researcher with a quantitative bent. His group at MIT produced Korovus and a number of startups later. He is still at today as a senior fellow in QTEL. He writes a lot of at every length, which I love, and sometimes it gets read, believe it or not, such as the semi-famous paper on whether a computing monoculture rises to the level of a national security risk. He's an electrical engineer, a statistician, and someone who thinks truth is best achieved by adversarial procedures. I love that, Dan. So hey, would love to hear any initial thoughts you might have, on this intersection, on this cross-pollination that we might be witnessing, and anything else you'd like to add from your own background as a starting off point.
Okay. All right. I have the captioning on, so I can tell that the machine knows that I'm speaking. So that we'll let it go with that. Thanks for the intro. I am. The first rule of statistics is all data has bias. The question is, can you correct for it? So the bias I have here is I actually was trained as a statistician in a public health school. That has no doubt some impact that I can't put my finger on, but nevertheless, for those of you who want to start discounting biases, I come with that one. The thing about public health that I guess strikes me as most relevant to cybersecurity is that public health worries about problems that only are problems in the large. It's not going to find a problem for you. It's going to find a problem for us, or it's not going to suggest a solution for you. It's going to suggest a solution for us. Surgery, for example, is not a public health discipline. As you probably know, epidemiology is a public health discipline. From it, we learn about risks in ways that we can't learn by studying individuals. And it is that I think motivates me to work with this group here, is that there are, in fact, cybersecurity components which can only be addressed in the large. And if we don't address them in the large, they won't get addressed. What's a trivial example? A recent proposal to deroute everything ending in .ru. That's nuts. Anything that destabilizes the domain name system is nuts. And why? It's because it's a common dependence. And we shouldn't do things like that. What's another example? Public reporting of vulnerabilities and things of that sort. The last 15 years, as I'm sure most people here know, have been all about what is responsible disclosure. How do you, when you discover a problem that is out there, like a botnet, for example, how do you disclose that without making it worse? That's a public health point of view. That's how do you fix it without making it worse? There are lots of things we could fix, but that would make things worse in the process. That's not public health. I don't know how much you want us each to say. Can I stop there, or is that about right?
Oh, no, I think that's a perfect starting point, Dan. Yeah. I mean, you queued up several really important issues, including, I appreciate, bringing even in the comments, hey, it's the Ocean Workshop after all. So I appreciate that very much. And we'll be pulling on several of these threads after we go through this kind of initial round here. So thank you very, very much. And then next we'll be turning, got the order. Yep. Next we'll be turning to Yurie. Yurie Ito is the founder and executive director of the CyberGreen Institute. She has devoted her career to making the internet safer and more resilient for all, having served in leadership positions at JP Cert, ICANN First, AP Cert, and GCA. So Yurie, please.
Thank you. Excuse me, and good afternoon all. First, I'd like to express my gratitude to Scott and Ostrom Workshop to co-host this roundtable. And then thank you all for participating in this roundtable discussion. CyberGreen is a New York-based nonprofit organization that conducts and supports research to establish the science of cyber public health. Before I'm starting, my colleague Arastu Taslim is on this call. I like to introduce him to the group too. He's an engine of and our execution of the whole operation study. So with that, my earlier career was at Japan's National CERT, JP CERT. And our sponsor government always asked if there was any good data evidence to show we are doing good or bad or getting better, or even, was sometimes asked for any data available to support the story someone likes to tell. Unfortunately, then and today, we don't have access to robust data and metrics to support cybersecurity policy decisions, as is the effectiveness of national policy strategy and mitigation efforts, and going further, identify the wider determinants of cybersecurity risk or predict future outcomes. So we all know we need to change that. I see there are a few experts on this group who are working to establish a cybersecurity census, bureau type of thing in this country. CyberGreen's big sponsor, the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, in short, area, has also been investing for the last 3 years to CyberGreen to develop this cyber public health model and metrics framework. And now we are ambitiously aiming ASEAN's ministers meeting next year to talk about cyber public health and in scoring. So there are a lot of policy, level attention to this field. When we held a first experts working group back in 2016, when we established this CyberGreen, try to determine mission and what to measure. Dr. Dan Geer, Dan, our metrics advisor, advised us we should measure risk factors that harm others. And then that was the start of our journey of cyber public health. It is a change of perspective. So public health is about, as Dan mentioned, it is about identifying the risk factors that harm to society level health, analyzing the underlying cause, and assist the intervention using data-driven investigation, population level thinking, and proactive mitigation measures to shared risks. So in other words, public health is about raising society level of resiliency against the health problems. So, and we believe this approach is applicable and revolutionizes cybersecurity practices in many layers. So some of the inspiration from, some of the inspiration from the public health metrics and analysis is Healthy People 2030. By U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Global Burden of Health by University of Washington, Health at a Glance report by OECD. Those are great inspiration, at least for me in a group. If I may share a bit of my personal story, my grandfather's grandfather, Kasahara Ryoichi, is recognized as one of the pioneers of public health in Japan. He devoted his life to introducing and popularizing the smallpox vaccine to Japan back in 1849. But people rejected that idea aggressively, of course, throwing stones at him and stuff. He put his own life at risk for his belief in preventative interventions. I think I inherited that passion in myself. And anyways, Adam Shostack, now speaking after me, got to know about my passion and our work, and he agreed to work with us to develop cyber public health model, which is he was advocating as well. Since then, that was 3 years ago. Since then, Adam helped us structure more scientific study and roadmap, develop solid progress to make the cyber public health idea to more cyber health model. And we published Internet Infrastructure Health Metrics Framework. In short, it's IIHMF. And then a few technical papers, including Cyber Public Health Fuller Model and Cyber Vital Health Data. They're all on our website, CyberGreen's website, under the research section. IIHMF is now in phase 2. We are developing a scoring system and planning to start phase 3 this fall with our sponsor, again, Area. So today, I'm so excited to meet these great scientists and thinkers on this call to discuss the applicability of public health approach to cyber issues. And I'm keen to hear from you all what policy and research we need to establish the cyber public health. And CyberGreen has a very ambitious timeline to establish a cyber science of cyber public health, advocating national policymakers all around the world to apply public health approach to cybersecurity and develop a cyber census office to systematically collect cyber population data and ecosystem health data, making them available for scientists and researchers. So with that, it is my pleasure to pass this to Adam Shostack to talk about our study more in depth. Back to you, Scott.
That was fantastic, Yurie. Yeah, I meant to tee you up with one of those leading questions of what are the major components of public health? Why is it relevant for discussing cybersecurity? But you did not need it and did a wonderful job of laying the foundation for us extremely, extremely well. So thank you. And of course, for all of your important work more broadly. And then Adam, yes, please, would love to hear from your perspective on these current studies and projects and perhaps a little bit more detail before we turn to Andrea after.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, and thank you, Yurie. And I want to start with a little bit of my own history here, because I have this really long-standing interest in questions of why we do what we do, why we believe in the effectiveness of various controls. And in a sense, this is magnified because I've been in the field for longer than many of those practices or the products that bring them to us. And in fact, in the 1990s, I helped create the snake oil warning sign FAQ, which was all about bad products in cryptography. And obviously, it was one of the early uses of a health analogy, right? And obviously, it followed what Fred Cohen had done in the 80s, coining the term computer virus. But I want to talk about my journey and I want to do this to provide some concrete details that might help the roundtable and then think on where we should go. So in 2010, I was at Microsoft and my management team asked me about the importance of zero-day attacks and how we should contextualize them. And that project really crystallized for me some of the challenges we had in measuring how computers get infected at scale, what we could call the incidence or prevalence of problems. And it also led to Microsoft changing auto-run, and we predicted and actually saw 1 million fewer infections and cleanups every month, which was about a 25% drop, making it one of the most effective cyber public health interventions ever. And when we talked about it in Microsoft's Security Intelligence Report, I named it Project Broad Street in a very conscious homage to John Snow, who of course had an intervention in the London cholera epidemics. So following that, we did a lot of follow-on work and ran into tremendous methodological data gathering challenges that have informed my work since. And a lot of that I've framed in lesson learning. How do we build an NTSB or a near-miss analysis system? Some of that we did at Harvard's Belfer Center with Rob Kanacki, who's now at the White House. And that actually led to me meeting you, Scott, when Rob and I contributed to your Cyber Peace book. Also, when Angela Sase, who unfortunately can't join us today, invited me to give a distinguished lecture at CASA, I started out with threat modeling, which is a lot of the basis of my work. And as I asked, how do we know about threats and how do we prioritize what to address? And also this was at the start of the pandemic, it influenced a lot of my thinking. And I found myself drawn to public health, and I ended up titling that lecture, "We Need a Discipline of Cyber Public Health." And that led to me meeting Yurie and collaborating with CyberGreen where, as she explained, we're working on both some very specific and some very broad goals. One of the things that we care about. Hey, George, can you, thank you. Never mind.
Got it, sorry.
Yes. So some of the things we've done, some technical reports, we did a structured reflection on cyber public health, where we went through a standard textbook in public health and said, what does this teach us? We also looked at vital statistics in public health, and some of, terms that I used earlier, incidence, prevalence, require that we have population sorts of data to help us build statistics. Those are really actually shockingly hard to find in the world of technology. And today, we're deeply engaged in some work in adapting a model called the health belief model, which is all about how do our beliefs influence the likelihood that we're going to go get healthcare. And we're using Log4Shell, a recent set of issues, to do that investigation. And we're getting some really exciting outcomes that I think are going to inform that we can use the idea that it's not just technology, it's our perceptions and beliefs about the technology that influence our health. And so today, I'm really excited to be here at an Ostrom workshop event because of the interdisciplinary nature of the workshop and the focus on putting solutions into practice, both of which I think are tremendously valuable. And I believe that cyber public health is going to be most meaningful as a discipline that spans theory and practice, where each informs the other. And as you said, Scott, I hope this is the start of something lovely. I think we're at the point where it's not unreasonable to think that in a few years, we could have a cyber public health lab at a major university. Within a decade, I think we could reasonably think about some college having a department of cyber public health. And I think it's my hope that today, the work that we do can lead us down towards that path. So thank you. Thrilled to be here. Thrilled at the mixture of theory and practice, academia and industry that you've brought together, and really looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Oh, likewise. Likewise, Adam. That was very, very well done. And thank you as always for your thought leadership in these areas. And then lastly, we have Andrea, Bonime-Blanc, and Andrea is coming at this vantage point, this kind of intersection from a slightly different perspective, but I think a really useful one for us, because as we think about different, context and analogies from which to view different ways to conceptualize and manage cyber risks, one that's taken the front seat a lot of the time has been kind of sustainable development and ESG, ESG plus T, as Andrea helped coin. And I'm wondering, Andrea, if you could help illuminate a little bit for us from your tremendous work in this area, including from your recent book, which I'd really recommend, Gloom to Boom, about some of the ways in which the tools that have been, developed, for example, to promote sustainability, to think about, managing all of the risks and all the stakeholders that we think about in that context can be deployed as we think about cybersecurity. And as Adam and Yurie were talking about, tracking some of these metrics and these bigger populations and even ecosystems, right? So would love to hear any thoughts that you might have along those lines as well, knowing that public health is not your not your focus.
I believe in it, but it's not my focus.
That's right.
Thank you, Scott, so much for inviting me to this wonderful group of people. Clearly a very interdisciplinary and fascinating group of people who can, I really believe cyber is one of those areas where you need the interdisciplinary approach of people from different walks of life, putting their lens and their views on a series of complex challenges and problems. And I think also opportunities that cannot be solved by one function alone or one perspective alone. So kudos to you for doing this. And I feel honored to be in the company of such great people here. My perspective, as you alluded, I come from the business world, from the corporate world. I spent about 18 years as a corporate executive, mostly as a general counsel, but I moved increasingly to ethics and compliance, corporate responsibility, the whole ESG field that is now burgeoning, taking care of, what I like to call the intangible risks and opportunities that businesses often don't pay attention to, but frankly, in the recent couple of years, they've been forced to pay attention to, between COVID, between cyber, the geopolitical issues that we have now, and so on. So for the last 10 years, I've had my own business where I kind of do, on the outside looking in, helping corporate boards and executives think about their big strategic risks. And I also like to talk about them as opportunities. And the whole ESG plus T is sort of a formulation I put in my book, Bloom to Boom, thanks for mentioning it, where I go into environmental, social, governance, and I've added the T for technology, which revolves around the cyber issue and other issues that I'm not as familiar with because I'm just not a scientist or an engineer, but I like to talk about these things because again, it goes back to, it has to be interdisciplinary, and we need all eyes on these things to solve the problems and to create better solutions. After I left the corporate world, well, the last job I had in the corporate world is what actually teed me into the whole cyber piece. I was the head of compliance, audit, risk, and corporate responsibility for a technology company that was just under $1 billion in revenues, international, very sort of dynamic, aggressive, publicly traded. And they suddenly threw cybersecurity in my lap and they said, go figure this one out. And so that got me really immersed in understanding, how do you manage cybersecurity within an organization, especially a very diversified, geographically dispersed. And my big conclusion was, you have to get cyber governance right. You have to get the executive team and the board to define what is their philosophy for cyber. And by philosophy, I mean culture. I mean security philosophy, I guess. Security, it's not about the technical solutions, it's about the governance that you apply. And then that made me, once I left the corporate world and I started my own business, I actually did a couple of research projects for the conference board in which I focused on the emerging best practices of major companies on cyber risk governance. And so I spent a lot of time talking to some of these companies that haven't made the headlines because they actually were doing it really well. And learning those lessons and really sort of developing that as an area of practice for me, helping boards to become more cyber ready, more cyber savvy, understand what their role is, and the fact that they need to have people like us on their board, not just the financial wizards and the Jack Welches of the world. I'm reading a book about them right now, which is kind of scary, but we need people who bring the cyber expertise, the ESG expertise, other lenses to boardrooms. And so the cyber world, I think, has grown a lot in the last 10 years, but it's still pretty in need of people at the very top of these pyramids who are savvy and able to connect the technology piece with the governance piece and understand. And so besides all that, I serve on a couple of boards. One is a Cyber Future Foundation, which is a cyber nonprofit. But then I also serve on board of advisors of a cyber security network security firm, WireX, and then recently got off the board of advisors of CRISP, which isn't a cyber company, but it does disinformation, and it looks at sort of the dark early embers of disinformation and misinformation in the dark web and the deep web, and how that comes up to the surface web. So I think the cyber discussion really has to also include this disinformation, misinformation, because that, I mean, to me, that's a direct link to health, especially mental health issues. And so I think the cyber discussion, the disinformation discussion, are all part of a bigger whole that policymakers and businesses have to think about and do something about to protect themselves and to combat this kind of really, it is a pandemic of sorts, right? That's where that health issue really comes in very clearly. And I will finish my sort of personal journey by saying that I've also been teaching I created and taught a course, have been teaching a course at NYU called Cyber Leadership, Risk Oversight and Resilience. And the piece resilience to me is almost the most important when it comes to organizations, is how do we create the resilient organization from cybersecurity standpoint as well as others. But from a cybersecurity standpoint, it's about creating that governance, that culture, that cyber hygiene that we talk about a lot. It's mimicking best practices, adopting them, from a country standpoint and from an organizational standpoint. I always remember this story I heard from a very high level Estonian military person who talked about how their children learn about cyber hygiene in kindergarten. And so to me, again, that's just one of those tidbits that really resonated with me. But I'll fermer la bouche now so that others can speak. And so that's kind of the perspective I bring to this. And I'm excited and honored to be part of this conversation.
We're thrilled to have you as always, Andrea. And thank you so much for those very, very useful remarks. And I wanted to invite just kind of one last person on the call, just because of past conversations I've had with her, to maybe chime in for just a quick minute here before we turn to a couple of prepared questions for the speakers. And then, like I said, after that, everybody, it's going to be a general discussion. So start thinking about questions you have about the intersection of cybersecurity and public health, whether it's more metrics that we need to turn to, thinking through studies, thinking through the development of research labs, really a whole new field potentially opening up before our eyes here, right? What are some useful next steps that this group can take to help make sure that happens? So the next person I want to turn to again, just briefly, is Audrey. If you wouldn't mind, Audrey, saying hello. I know you were on the phone with your son briefly there, so sorry to call you out, but I wanted to give you a chance.
English time, it's bedtime, and
I understand.
Prompt, not getting bogged down by Netflix. So my work originally, I'm a law academic and worked a lot on cybercrime. But I shifted to moving to the interaction between cybercrime and cybersecurity about 6 or 7 years ago, when I looked at what I would call the unwarranted criminalization of cybersecurity. Well, not the whole cybersecurity research, but some aspects of it can be falling into the realm of cybercrime legislation. And what I got stuck also was how the debates of the last 10 or 15 years have not really moved on. So we're still having basic security failure with, I personally think, cybercrime legislation being completely inadequate. And actually, I did a presentation today to the annual Legal UK Academic Conference. And it was to say cybercrime legislation is really ignoring the problems. And if we take cybercrime, focused crime, hacking, unauthorized access, unauthorized damage, well, most of that would not exist if we didn't have appalling cybersecurity practices. So that's my, where I'm working at. And the other aspect that I'm struck by is I've got an interest in neurodiversity because of my son being dyslexic and my in-laws being mostly the entire family, wherever they are dyslexic. And in terms of cybersecurity, you've got to understand what neurodiversity means. It means they reuse the same password for everything. So I refused my husband to do banking online. because it's just appalling. But it got me, it got me thinking about, okay, they're reusing the password, but it's because they can't cope with the system the way we do it. And that's neurodiverse people, about 25% of the population. that's a huge amount of people. And then there is also the lack of conversation. That cyber hygiene in kindergarten, it resonates with me because I have those conversations with my son, and he's very good at understanding how TikTok works. And because obviously as a teenager, TikTok has the priority right now. But there are so many things that they're never resolved. And honestly, I don't know how to look at it. I don't have a public health background at all. I've done data protection with health data, but that's about it. So is that enough, Scott? Is that?
Oh no, that's beautiful. And those insights that you just shared, and just encouraging us to not treat the symptom, but the disease, as it were, right? Thinking more broadly about this is, I think, really, really well taken, as was your very important points about neurodiverse individuals, and how even when we try to approach, cybersecurity, awareness month in October, a lot of that is focused, on not on that 25% of the population, as you were saying, Audrey. And that's really important to take into account as well, because it's a significant percentage. That's absolutely right. And then I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here, because as you can tell, I think we could feature any of these folks for the full hour and still barely be able to scratch the surface. But I'm wondering, maybe to turn it back, we'll just do a few of these kind of curated questions, like we said, over the next 5 or so minutes. Then we'll open it up broadly from there, everybody. But maybe turning back to you, Dan, and Yurie, please feel free to tag team if you'd like. But just, from a governance perspective, I'm wondering what lessons, the field of public health holds for cybersecurity. Here at the workshop, we're pretty well known for helping to develop, this field of polycentric governance. And the CDC model was kind of long touted as this example of what a polycentric system for public health, could be, and some of the benefits of that. But there's no such thing as a panacea, as we've seen during the pandemic, and some of the failures, for example, of the CDC in particular in responding, here in the States. Obviously, there's been other issues with other public health organizations around the world. But for particular opportunities, obstacles, as I was saying, what lessons you feel that the field of public health in particular can help us, better understand when it comes to addressing, as Audrey was saying, the underlying disease here, not just some of the symptoms that crop up. What's kind of front and center for you, maybe first, Dan, then we'll turn to Yurie.
Well, on the governance side, public health has to make trade-offs, of course. I guess you might say that everything about public health is trade-offs. If indeed you forced everybody to be vaccinated, for example, in some way, from a purely health status point of view, things would be better. But on the other hand, you would generate a kind of resistance that would not bode well for the future. So there is a component of public health that requires, I'll use the current trendy word, transparency of the sort that encourages trust. I, at one point in my career, was working with, not for, but with the CDC on something. And if anybody within the sound of my voice has thought about working there, I would encourage you to pursue it. The issue there was, of course, data. And that's where the transparency and so forth comes in. If I say the data doesn't lie and it says this, if you want to object, you have to either go after, where did I get my data? Or you have to go over the methodology that allows me to make a statement of the form, the data says this. And it is a surveillance function. There's no doubt about it. If anybody has never seen the mortality and morbidity weekly report that comes out of the CDC, you might want to look at one sometime. It isn't, by the way, just consumed in the US, it's authoritative on a worldwide basis. And why? And the answer is because people have come to trust it. The authoritativeness in a public health situation does not grow out of physical power. It grows out of trust and reputation power. And if we're going to make differences in the cyber world, we sort of have to go there. And then, all the jokes about, oh, I use the same password everywhere, are exactly an example of that. People need to know that that's a bad idea, and they need to know why it's a bad idea. And I happen to think that they ought to have examples of how that has turned out to be a bad idea, that then provides proof by demonstration. The governance, though, I guess here I'll display that I am more quantitative than anything. I really think it is, we have to collect data in a way that survives current excitement. If you look at the way the census works, or you look at the way record keeping for I don't care, the Postal Service works, on and on. The idea that you collect data in a reliable fashion, regardless of the current need, because there will come a time when you need it. I think that is, well, it's how we do anomaly detection, for example. You collect a lot of data and you say, why is this, pick your example, why is this doing what it seems to be doing? Because we know that that is not what it ordinarily does. And if you've ever, well, let's just, you brought up COVID earlier. And what was the first indication of COVID? And the answer was people in China, some doctors in China were saying, there's this weird viral pneumonia that reminds us of SARS. And one thing led to another. That public announcement, which was admittedly clamped down on and sort of inadvertent as a public announcement and so forth, but it says, we know something about this and we now see an anomaly. That's such an example of governance in the cybersecurity public health model that I can't honestly think of another one. We or another better one. I mean, how did we find log4j? You could go on in that direction. The answer is we know something because we regularly observe it. Call it surveillance if you like, call it something else. We regularly observe it so that we can tell when a change that might be not for the good has taken place. And if we're going to make progress here, I think the CDC model, where in fact, I assume most people know this, but I'll say it, that the mandatory reporting of communicable diseases, what makes the CDC what it is? The answer is mandatory reporting of communicable diseases, enough history to be able to say whether something is a recurrence or a new thing, and the methodologic skill to demonstrate points like I just made to the satisfaction of skeptical scientific minds, even if it doesn't demonstrate it to the satisfaction of skeptical knuckleheads. Give up on that, by the way, you never will succeed on that. But I think the CDC and the data collection, I can't think of a better model. Now, some will argue, but I'll stop there in case someone wants to.
We'll see if anybody takes that up, Dan, but no, really, really helpful insights and some great history there too. And then maybe, again, just in the interest of time, turning to both Yurie and Adam, for sure, to get lessons and your thoughts on governance, more broadly. What does public health have to teach us as we think about, managing cybersecurity threats a bit more holistically, as well as, just frankly, how well you think treating cybersecurity as a public health concern either could or would resonate, right? If we really try to put our efforts behind that, both of course public sector academia, but also with our private sector colleagues as well. Thoughts on governance or on that intersection of treating public health as a cybersecurity concern and how well that's resonating. Maybe Yurie, you first, and then anything from Adam?
No, I'm going to suggest go to Adam because he did, a really in-depth research on this.
Perfect. No, that sounds great, Yurie. Thanks. Adam, please.
turn off mute.
Lose- oh, there we go. Perfect.
Let me get really concrete about this password thing and use it to illustrate. You know, one question that I would have is what fraction of problems, and I'm using that term very vaguely intentionally, what fraction of problems do bad passwords play a role in? How important is it to make these changes? And I have a lot of opinions, but if we want to tell Audrey's family to behave differently, then perhaps having data is part of that argument. You know, I heard on the radio this morning that there are 100,000 new COVID infections. I didn't hear that there are 100,000 compromised bank accounts this week as a result of password theft. And as we get into, should we drive change? There was a great talk at Black Hat by a gent named Kyle Tobner, who brought in harm reduction. And I'm sorry Kyle wasn't able to join us here today, but he talked about harm reduction as a frame from public health. And he said, not only do you need to tell people what not to do, you need to tell them what to do. And so, you know, for example, does using a password manager really help? How should we think about, for example, there was a breach at LastPass, a password management company. Does that invalidate the advice that we might have given? And I think these are questions that a discipline of public health, and to build on what Dan Geer said, a structure of institutional data gathering so that we're not just getting information about what happens to be hot right now, but that we can go and we can say, this is on the increase over the last several years. And so this is what we think you should really change, because we're not cherry picking data out of what we might happen to be gathering, but we've got some systemic institutional approaches. And so I think there's a lot we can really gain from looking over there to see what's being done to inspire what we could do in the future.
Really nice, concrete insights, Adam. Thank you so much. And Andrea, please, you know, chime in with any of this. But again, I don't want you to get too far out on the branch either. And I want to make sure we have time for everybody to kind of pile on here. So as I posted there in the chat, if you have questions, you know, feel free, raise your hand, you know, use the chat, whatever you're comfortable with, because we'd love to hear from you and your own research and how you think this field could be built out. I think there is a lot of potential.
If I could just interject.
Oh, please, Andrea, yeah.
Yeah, just a small thought to sort of bridge the gap between what would be sort of my main area of expertise or experience and what we've just heard. We really need to keep underscoring the importance of private-public partnership and operational partnership, as I think Jen Easterly talks about it. It's about not just talking, you know, the companies talking to the government agencies and so on. It's about developing action plans, developing the hygiene, the culture, the health in cyber that I think everybody's talking about. And so there has to be continued and upped coordination between those spheres. It can't just be two different tracks.
Spot on, Andrea. Absolutely. Excellent. Other questions, comments for the group? Things to mull. I know Adam and Yurie, you know, one idea that you brought up, and Dan, of course, as well, in your comments, was just the necessity of having much better and more robust metrics. Like we've tried, you know, you could argue how successful we've been in public health, but we certainly have more data and more diverse, you know, ways to get the data. Do you think even if we were able to establish something like a cyber statistics bureau, which has been called for by the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, would that get us enough of the way? Maybe that compared, as you were saying, Adam, with like a cyber NTSB, or really is that just, baby steps in what a full bore model of cyber public health really could look like? Maybe you could help, share your thoughts of what you feel like an end goal really would be, right? And how far away we are right now. And yeah, Adam, feel free. Yurie, whoever wants to jump on that first, please.
I think I hate to minimize steps like a Bureau of Cyber Statistics. Audrey was just mentioning in the chat that she's been looking at the state of statistics and cybercrime in the UK. And so progress, let's make progress. And I think that what I hope for 50 years from now is schools of cyber public health, is institutional data collection, is not any one thing, but a great many things. And I see we have a whole bunch of hands, so I'll stop there.
No, helpful though. Yeah, no, that's great. And let's make sure that we can do this lightning round. And again, this is hopefully just the start of a much longer conversation. And Jordan, I was appreciating your comments in the chat there as well, but please, yeah, any question you'd like to pose or thought. It doesn't have to be a question.
Sure, thank you. I have to give a plug for the author of the journal article I mentioned. He's the former faculty director of our center here at UC Berkeley. Actually, I'll make it really quick because I didn't see Tom's hand was raised. I know Tom, and I'm sure he's going to have a great question. I just have maybe a suggestion for synergies with other research communities, and that might be research communities focused on platform governance or content governance. I think that there are a lot of researchers concerned with the accumulation of harms that may not be seen as significant economically, but may be significant to individual people that are just difficult to measure at individual level. But I think that if policymakers could start to hear numbers that have, a scientific, statistically sound basis and not just sort of small, medium, or large, or high risk versus low risk, I think some of that quantification could really help policymakers, and you might find a lot of assistance to those other research communities I just mentioned.
Really good point, Jordan. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. Yeah, Tom.
Hi, thanks everybody. Sorry, I was only able to join the meeting a few minutes ago because I neglected to register properly for the Zoom
How
call.
dare you?
But I'm glad
it's quite all right.
make contact with all of you. And yeah, Jordan and I know each other, so we're collaborators, I guess, or contacts in that sense. And I just want to echo a lot of what she said about the need to make ties with the platform governance research community, and like the need for like lots of new metrics to be able to track what I've been calling structural harms in the context of my own work. And I'll actually put a link in the chat here to a recent piece that I co-authored with Nate Lubin that was published like last month in the MIT Tech Review, where we argue that what content moderation in recommender systems in social media is really missing is a public health lens. And that what the history of public health tells us is that there are specific types of like structural harms that you're not able to get at if you're just kind of hand labeling content on the level of like a human moderator trying to evaluate, instances of nudity or expletives or other sorts of like content of that nature. That really it's about mitigating the kind of feedback loops by which populations are exposed to certain kinds of risks at scale. So I would encourage, anybody who's interested in platform governance in particular to take a look at that piece. And please do reach out. I can put my email in the chat as well, and I'll follow up with as many of you as I can based off of the participants in this call. So thanks.
Yeah, and Yurie, Adam, Dan, anybody, feel free to respond. Of course, to Tom's points there, just really briefly, based on the last thing you said, Tom, we are going to be putting together a little working group coming out of this roundtable. So as I said there, if you'd like to have your email address included in the distribution list for that group, just let me know. We obviously have your details from how you registered for the event itself, but it's just an easy way for us to keep track of if you're particularly energized and want to continue on. We haven't decided, and we still can, about how frequently we would meet, etc. But I think, since there's a lot of interest in this intersection, I think regardless, we will be meeting again, and we'll find a convenient time. And then somebody just put their hand down. Did I lose track of them?
Hey, Scott, this is Dylan
Sorry.
Pressman.
Oh, Dylan. Yep.
I apologize. Because of the White House systems, we don't have little hands to put up. And we
I
also
totally understand.
can't see the chat. But I did want to pile on something that Adam said about the Bureau of Cyber Statistics. One of the, and this also touches on what Dan was saying, one of the major differences between health and cybersecurity is that lack of good data. And there is legislation out there at the moment to establish a Bureau of Cyber Statistics that would have very, very limited statistics coming into it. And that's really problematic on first blush. It only would have statistics coming from cybersecurity insurance and their organizations, and they only make up sort of 20% of the market. However, as Adam said, if you can get some way to a goal, it's better than not getting anywhere. And establishing a Bureau of Cyber Statistics would be such an important milestone or pivot point, inflection point for the entire ecosystem, that is a worthy goal on its own, even with the limitations and the problems that those limitations will have.
It's such a good point, Dylan, of being pragmatic and not letting the great be the enemy of the good, and especially following on the mandatory, ransomware reporting that we've already seen get through. It's, it's possible that we could see something like the Cyber Statistics Bureau, which could at least, as you're saying, and as Adam laid out, be a really useful step in this direction anyway. So as we approach, the last few minutes here, would love to hear any other final questions or thoughts from the group. Like I said, we'll be organizing a distribution list because I think there's a variety of ways to take this, including, looking at, for example, funding opportunities to really build out this arena of cyber public health with new studies, maybe new scholarships for students. Eventually, as you said, Adam, even a full bore lab, I think would be a fantastic thing to shoot for, one day, as well as just opportunities to distill some of this down as the research starts to come out in terms of white papers for policymakers, Dylan and others. So again, we're only able to do so much in an hour, but I think this has been a tremendous start to the conversation. I'm wondering, in the minute or so we have left, maybe I'll turn to you, Yurie, and just see if you have any reflections or any other kind of marching orders or closing thoughts from your side too.
No, I am, I'm excited and thrilled to hear all these, comments and, input on this. And, as this is a huge area, huge domain, and then there's layers of things to do to establish this cyber public health, from the data-driven investigation to teaching and outreaching and educating people to change perspective, which is more education and advocates about, let's not do just the medicine, but public health. Take a look at the society level, shared risks, focus on the resiliency. That's really advocacy too. So, data, and then science starts from data, and then a policy needed definitely to collect this type of mandate, data collection like CDC. I also like the CDC, model. I'm sure there's a lot of criticism about the response to the COVID-19 and everything, but some mandate reporting about diseases and in patients, these are something that we can learn a lot. And in that we need a policymakers to help us. So layer of things. And with this group, I think it is a great start to continue this conversation. And so I'm very excited, appreciate the opportunities and hope to continue this.
Oh, likewise, absolutely. And I could envision, frankly, just a series of, even if we wanted to do once a month and just delve into each of those silos, right? Whether it's, data driven, decision making for policymakers, conceptualizing a series of studies, looking at grant opportunities, looking at teaching and curricular. Anyway, there's a variety of ways we could break it apart, but I think, now that we've laid out the field of questions anyway, doing a few deep dives for a group that's interested, and thanks for everybody chiming in the chat there, I think would be a great next step. Any final thoughts from you, maybe Dan, and then we'll turn to Adam and Andrea, because we need to drop off here. I know people have to run.
This is Dan, and I'm one of those that has to run.
Totally.
Final thoughts would be that in other arenas, as someone put in the chat, in other arenas, for example, automobile insurance, we have mandatory rules. One of the things that Yurie referred to early on was an idea that we had with the CyberGreen project, and that was not so much focus on others' harm to you, but on your harm to others. And when you look at that, like I'm running an open relay or something of that sort, you begin to look at a kind of measurement that can only be done in a public health style. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna run now, but thank you.
Yeah, really, really good point though, Dan. Thank you so much for joining. And Adam, please, any final thought from you, sir?
Just really excited by the variety that we're seeing in the chat, and the points that even after years of thinking about this are from different communities. I think there's such enormous value in bringing folks together and creating a forum for collaboration. I'm really excited that we've done this and looking forward to the next steps.
Absolutely. Likewise, Adam. And Andrea?
Just to say the same, echo everything that has just been said. I think this is a great forum, great way to create more awareness and data and governance around something that really needs it desperately. So thank you for having me part of this.
More. Well, final round of applause for all of our featured speakers and to all of you for joining. This has been just this tremendous roundtable, and really just a kickoff to a series of conversations on cyber public health. So we'll be in touch with next steps. Yurie, Adam, we'll huddle up in particular and talk about this further. So be on the lookout for further emails. And thanks everybody so much again for joining. Hope you have a great rest of your week.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks all. Yurie, Adam, that was great. I know you guys got to run too.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, I just wanted to double down in private to say that, the stuff that Jordan and Tom were saying about social media governance as a form of pollution. I saw an article in the Seattle Times this morning about our representative Jayapal and someone showing up outside her home waving a gun.